Psalm 27 from the King James Version is one of the most uplifting and faith-strengthening passages in the entire Bible. It speaks to the heart of anyone who has ever faced fear, uncertainty, or trials. At its core, it is a declaration of trust, courage, and unwavering belief in God's protection. The psalm begins with the bold proclamation, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" These words alone carry immense power. They remind us that God is both our guiding light and the source of our rescue. Darkness may surround us, but the light of the Lord pierces through, showing the way forward. When we truly believe this, fear loses its grip on our hearts. David, the Psalm's author, knew what it meant to be pursued by enemies and surrounded by danger. Yet instead of despairing, he placed his confidence entirely in the Lord. The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? This is not mere poetry. It is a life stance. When we recognize that our strength is not our own but comes from God Himself, we walk with a quiet boldness. In the following verses, David paints a vivid picture of security. Even if an army encamps against him, his heart will not fear. This is more than bravery. It is faith in action. It shows us that trust in God is not dependent on the size of the threat, but on the greatness of the one who stands with us. David then expresses his deepest desire. "One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." This longing reveals that the ultimate source of peace is not merely deliverance from trouble, but living in close fellowship with God. To dwell in His presence is to be surrounded by His beauty, wisdom, and safety. The psalm also speaks of divine protection in times of trouble. God will hide us in His pavilion and set us upon a rock. This imagery is rich with meaning. A pavilion is a place of shelter. A rock is a foundation that cannot be moved. When we abide in God, we are both sheltered and unshakable. David's confidence turns to praise as he says, "And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me." This lifting of the head is a sign of victory, not because of personal strength, but because of God's intervention. He promises to offer sacrifices of joy and to sing praises unto the Lord. Yet the psalm is not without moments of vulnerability. David pleads for God to hear his voice when he cries out, to not hide his face, and to not forsake him. This shows us that faith does not mean the absence of struggle. Rather, it means bringing our struggles honestly before God and trusting Him to answer. The psalm reaches a point of tender reassurance. "When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." Even if earthly relationships fail, God's love remains steadfast. He becomes the ultimate source of acceptance, belonging, and care. David asked God to teach him His way and to lead him in a plain path because of his enemies. This prayer reminds us that God's guidance is as important as His protection. It is not enough to be shielded from harm. We must also be directed toward truth and righteousness. The psalm concludes with one of the most beautiful expressions of hope in the Bible. "I had fainted, unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." Here we are reminded that hope is sustained not by what we see now, but by what we believe God will do. David then leaves us with a final charge. "Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and He shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord." Psalm 27 is not just ancient poetry. It is a living testimony of how trust in God transforms fear into courage, despair into hope, and weakness into strength. It invites us to anchor our lives in God's light, to dwell in His presence, and to wait patiently for His perfect timing. In every season of life, these words remain a source of inspiration, reminding us that with the Lord as our light and salvation, there is truly nothing to fear. Let us look even deeper into the richness of Psalm 27 and the spiritual truths it holds. The opening statement, "The Lord is my light and my salvation," is more than a poetic phrase. It is a declaration of identity. To call God our light is to acknowledge Him as the one who reveals truth, exposes deception, and guides us through the shadows of confusion and fear. Light is not passive. It pushes back against darkness, revealing the path where before there was only uncertainty. In the same breath, David calls God his salvation, the one who rescues not only from physical enemies but also from sin, despair, and hopelessness. Salvation is not merely an event, but an ongoing reality, an assurance that God's hand is ever at work in our lives. When David says, "Whom shall I fear?" he is not boasting in himself. His boldness comes from the unshakable foundation of God's power and faithfulness. This question challenges the reader to examine what fears hold them captive. If God truly is our light, salvation, and strength, then fear is rendered powerless. The psalm speaks vividly of danger, enemies and armies rising against the psalmist. But David's heart remains steadfast. He does not deny the presence of danger, nor does he pretend life is without hardship. Instead, he reveals that courage is not the absence of threats, but the presence of trust. Faith does not promise that the storms will cease. It promises that we will be carried through them. David's singular desire, "that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life," is a lesson in spiritual focus. He does not ask first for safety, wealth, or revenge. He asks for nearness to God. This longing to dwell in the Lord's presence is the wellspring from which his courage flows. In God's presence, there is beauty that lifts the soul, wisdom that directs the mind, and peace that steadies the heart. The imagery of being hidden in God's pavilion during times of trouble is both comforting and profound. A pavilion is a place of shelter, often reserved for honored guests. To be hidden in God's pavilion means to be treated as one beloved and protected, out of reach of the enemy's hand. Being set upon a rock speaks of stability. When we stand on God's truth, no shifting tide or violent wind can move us from the place of safety He provides. David's heart bursts into praise in the midst of this psalm. He speaks of offering sacrifices of joy and singing to the Lord. This reveals an important spiritual principle. Praise is not only the result of victory, it is also a weapon in the midst of the battle. Praise shifts our focus from the threat before us to the God who reigns over all. Yet in his honesty, David does not shy away from pleading with God. He asks the Lord to hear him, to not hide his face, and to not forsake him. This blend of faith and vulnerability is a reminder that God invites us to approach Him with both confidence and humility. He knows our weakness and yet welcomes our voice. The assurance that, "When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up," speaks to the depths of human loneliness. Earthly relationships may fail, but God's faithfulness is absolute. His acceptance does not waver, His care does not diminish, and His love does not falter. David's prayer for guidance, "Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path," shows us that protection without direction is incomplete. God does not merely shield us from harm, He leads us toward the life He has prepared for us. The plain path is the path of clarity, truth, and righteousness, free from the entanglements of deceit and confusion. The Psalm's closing lines are among the most stirring in Scripture. David admits that he would have fainted had he not believed in the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. This is a faith that expects to see God's hand at work not only in eternity, but here and now. It is a faith that sustains through waiting, through unanswered prayers, and through seasons of silence. Finally, the call to wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and He shall strengthen thine heart, is both a command and a promise. Waiting is not passive idleness. It is an active trust, a steady gaze fixed on God's faithfulness. Courage comes not from ignoring fear, but from trusting the one who holds the future. And the promise is certain. Those who wait on Him will find their hearts strengthened by His presence. Psalm 27 is a journey from declaration to desire, from vulnerability to victory, from waiting to renewal. It teaches us that God's light will guide us, His salvation will secure us, His strength will sustain us, and His presence will satisfy us. In every moment of fear, uncertainty, or longing, the words of this psalm stand as a reminder that the Lord is indeed our light and our salvation, and in Him we have nothing to fear. Psalm 27 also carries within it a rhythm of faith that is both personal and universal. David speaks as an individual facing his own trials, yet the language is expansive enough to apply to the struggles of every believer across time. The psalm moves like a conversation between the human heart and the living God. Moments of bold proclamation flow into quiet pleas for help, then return to confident hope. This pattern mirrors the spiritual life itself, where seasons of courage are often followed by moments of weakness, yet both are held in the presence of God. The opening. Assurance that God is our light anchors the rest of the psalm. Light in Scripture is often associated with truth, purity, and divine guidance. Without it, we stumble in darkness, unable to see the obstacles before us or the path ahead. In declaring God as light, David reminds us that our understanding of life's challenges must begin with His illumination. It is not our own reasoning that shows us the way, but the steady and unwavering radiance of His presence. Salvation, the second attribute David names, is equally crucial. It speaks to rescue, not only from visible dangers, but from the unseen threats of sin, despair, and spiritual death. The Hebrew sense of the word encompasses deliverance, safety, and victory. When David says God is his salvation, he is affirming that his ultimate deliverance comes not from military strength, wealth, or human allies, but from the Lord Himself. The third pillar in verse 1, the strength of his life, ties the imagery together. Strength here is not merely physical power. It is the inner fortitude that sustains a person when every external resource fails. This kind of strength is forged in the presence of God, a strength that enables a person to stand when the natural reaction would be to flee. When David speaks of enemies and armies rising against him, he is not speaking in vague or symbolic terms. He had experienced these realities. Yet his language also serves as a metaphor for the spiritual battles that every believer faces. Fear, temptation, doubt, and discouragement can advance against the heart like a well-organized army. The psalm teaches that the response to such attacks is not to focus on the size of the threat, but on the power of the one who stands with us. David's one desire, to dwell in the house of the Lord, reveals the heart of his faith. This desire was not limited to the physical temple or tabernacle. It was about living continually in the nearness of God. In ancient Israel, the house of the Lord represented the place where God's presence was most fully experienced. For the believer today, this longing speaks of an ongoing, intimate relationship with God, a life shaped by worship, meditation, and obedience. The promise that God will hide His people in His pavilion during trouble is both protective and intimate. A pavilion is not only a place of safety, it is a place of honor, often reserved for a king's guests. This imagery suggests that in times of distress, God does not merely shield us from harm. He draws us closer to Himself, placing us in a position of dignity and care. To be set upon a rock adds the dimension of stability. While enemies may rage, the one who stands on God's foundation will not be moved. David's transition into praise shows the inseparable connection between trust and worship. His declaration that he will offer sacrifices of joy teaches that gratitude and worship are not reserved for moments after deliverance, but are powerful expressions of faith even before the outcome is visible. Singing to the Lord in the midst of trouble is a statement that God's goodness is not dependent on circumstances. The Psalms shift to personal petition, asking God not to hide His face or turn away, is deeply human. Faith does not remove the need to cry out. Rather, it gives us the confidence to bring our deepest fears and needs to God. David acknowledges his dependence, recognizing that apart from God's presence, he cannot stand. The assurance that God will take up the abandoned speaks to one of the most painful realities of human experience: rejection and loss of belonging. Parents, the most natural source of care and love, may fail, but God's commitment does not falter. This truth provides profound comfort to those who have faced abandonment, neglect, or betrayal. David's request for a plain path is a prayer every believer can make. Life often presents crossroads clouded by uncertainty, where the way forward is not clear. Asking God for a plain path is seeking clarity and direction that aligns with His truth. It is a desire to walk in a way that avoids unnecessary snares and that reflects His righteousness to the watching world. The closing call to wait on the Lord is both an instruction and a reassurance. Waiting on God is an act of trust that resists the urge to take matters into our own hands. It is a deliberate choice to believe that His timing is perfect, even when our circumstances seem urgent. The promise is clear: those who wait will have their hearts strengthened. The repetition, "Wait, I say, on the Lord," emphasizes its importance. Waiting is not wasted time. It is the season in which God prepares both the path and the person. Psalm 27, therefore, is more than a personal prayer of David. It is a guide for living in faith through every season of life. It teaches that courage comes from God's presence, that worship is both a response to and an expression of trust, that God's protection is both strong and tender, and that waiting on Him is the surest path to strength. These truths remain as relevant today as they were in the days of David, offering light, salvation, and strength to all who make the Lord their refuge.